Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are wading deep into a conflict where human trauma and, well, the chaos of recall meet the cold, hard, unyielding facts of forensic science.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
We are focused squarely on the 12-hour period between Christmas night and the early morning of December 26, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado.
This is a deep dive into what we're calling the fragile timeline. Our listener provided a stack of interviews, investigative notes, autopsy reports, a lot of material.
Right.
And when you lay it out chronologically, you get this narrative that's just riddled with profound and often really painful contradictions. So we're here to pinpoint those specific moments where the family's, sincerely held memory just buckles under the weight of objective physical evidence.
And that's our mission today, really, to unpack these specific conflicts.
Yeah.
Because the investigative community, they've grappled with this tension for decades now. The family's narrative is anchored, really, to the assumption of an external threat.
An intruder, yeah.
Which suggests the home was totally secure when they returned. But even that foundational idea, that was challenged pretty early on.
Absolutely. The tension actually starts before the discovery of the note, believe it or not. John Ramsey himself noted in an April 30th, 1997 interview, his words were that the security situation of the home that night was dramatically out of the ordinary.
Dramatically out of the ordinary. That's quite specific.
It is. And this wasn't just looking back, after everything happened. It was apparently a feeling they had even before they understood the tragedy fully. They mentioned things like unlocked doors, maybe a basement window left open, things they kind of struggled to rationalize later.
Okay, so that context is crucial then. It frames their immediate state of mind, maybe.
There's
a sense of unease, perhaps, that something was already a bit off.
Exactly.
So we're framing the rest of this conversation around those specific points where the sincerity of memory, however real it felt to them, meets the unyielding facts of the investigation. And this creates these gaps, these investigative gaps, that endless theories have tried to bridge.
Yeah, for decades.
Let's jump right into those crucial hours, starting with their return home. Okay, let's unpack this. The clock starts ticking the moment the family gets back from the Whites' home. Our source material puts us around, 9 p.m., maybe 9:15 p.m. on Christmas night?
Somewhere in that window, yeah.
And this is the moment the official timeline of events should theoretically stop, right? Because the narrative presented by the parents asserts that, nothing else happened involving the family after that point.
Right. And this specific moment establishes what is, certainly in John Ramsey's mind, the psychological anchor of the entire narrative, the point of absolute certainty for him.
Okay.
John Ramsey, in a 1998 interview, held this very firm recollection that he carried JonBenet upstairs, and the sources really emphasize his descriptive language here. She was sound asleep when he put her down.
That detail, sound asleep, that feels absolutely critical because it establishes a boundary, doesn't it? A critical boundary for the investigation. If she was sound asleep, immobile, undisturbed, then everything that happens after that point must involve an external agent.
Precisely. That's the logic. And that psychological anchor is then reinforced by John's own account of his actions. He recounts getting back to his own bed, reading for a few minutes, then falling asleep himself.
Okay.
So this solidifies his belief, his certainty, that his daughter was safe, static, deeply asleep in her bed, which, logically precludes any interaction between her and any family member for the rest of the night. But this certainty, however emotionally necessary might have been for him, would later collide very sharply with forensic findings that strongly suggest activity during those very hours.
Okay, so we have the family establishing this timeline boundary, let's say 9:15 p.m. to roughly 6 a.m. And during that time, the child was motionless, secure. Now we move into the discovery moment, the morning of the 26th.
Right. Patsy Ramsey's account, this is captured in a 1998 interview, states she woke between 5:30 a.m. and 6 a.m. She was getting ready for their planned family trip to Charlevoix. Just a normal morning routine starting.
Until it wasn't.
Until it wasn't. Her routine was instantly shattered by finding that ransom note, laid out apparently quite deliberately on the staircase.
Okay, here's where the decision-making in a crisis becomes subject to intense scrutiny, doesn't it? The immediate call to the police.
Yes.
Patsy stated she only glanced at a portion of the note. She saw the warning, "Don't call the police." Yet, she called 911 immediately, regardless.
And this immediate action, defying explicit instructions from what appeared to be a kidnapper, this is a massive friction point. Investigators, the public, they've dissected this endlessly.
Because in a textbook kidnapping scenario.
Right. The number one rule for law enforcement for the family is usually compliance with demands like that, especially early on, to avoid escalating violence.
But Patsy maintained.
She maintained her maternal instinct just overrode the written warning. She said she simply couldn't process the note's threat in that moment of panic. And to be fair, that explanation remained consistent across all her interviews.
But when you look at investigative methodology, I mean, this immediate call is highly unusual, isn't it? If the threat was real, if you truly believed an armed group was holding your child somewhere, why would you risk infuriating them?
Exactly.
This immediate defiance of the demand, it must have made it difficult for the police to take the ransom note at face value from the start.
Oh, absolutely. It likely led them almost instantly to consider alternative explanations, including the possibility that the note itself was some kind of diversion or staging.
And there's another consequence too, right? The rapid notification.
Yes, the scene, the physical scene, which should have been secured immediately, treated as a potentially active crime scene, it was instantly contaminated. By the family's own presence, understandably frantic. Then the arrival of the first police officers, who maybe weren't treating it initially as a homicide scene, and then later friends started arriving.
Oh, right. Fleet White and others.
Exactly. And on top of that, the trauma of the ensuing hours, it severely degraded the family's ability to recall a clear, sequential, detailed timeline, which just further frustrated the investigators trying to piece things together.
That's the key psychological element we need to delve into, I think. That memory under extreme duress.
Yeah.
John himself admitted, didn't he, in a '98 interview, that his timing was perpetually messed up.
He did. He described the period after the police arrived as a complete blur. And that's consistent with trauma. When a person experiences that level of shock and terror, the brain literally struggles to encode sequential facts. It prioritizes survival, not record keeping.
And Patsy?
Patsy described herself as being just immobile for all intents and purposes immediately after the discovery. Again, a classic shock reaction. But it makes collecting reliable testimony incredibly difficult in those initial hours.
And we see evidence of this fragility even with mundane details, right? I think you mentioned an earlier interview.
Yeah, in a 1997 interview, it highlights this complexity of recall. Patsy couldn't immediately remember what they'd eaten for Christmas Day dinner. She even noted, why didn't somebody ask me that then? The simple details get lost, let alone the intricate sequence of a highly traumatic event.
So what does this all mean? This accumulation of frantic, fragmented, sometimes contradictory memories. What does it mean for that official timeline?
It means it's based on memory that is inherently fragile. It just is.
So the so what question here for investigators.
The so what is critical. When reality breaks, when a major traumatic event shatters your world, people often default, perhaps unconsciously, to the most comforting narrative. Or maybe the most socially acceptable one.
Which in this case was the external intruder theory.
Exactly. But as investigators like Detective Tom Haney suggested in their analysis, it's necessary, it's standard procedure really, to remain open to the uncomfortable internal possibility. Because the memory provided under extreme duress might be sincerely held, truly believed by the person, but still factually unreliable.
And we absolutely cannot discuss this fragile timeline without examining the critical context of the Ramseys securing legal counsel so rapidly. This is their constitutional right, of course, but it's timing.
Right.
It had massive consequences for the investigation.
Massive. The rapid acquisition of legal counsel fundamentally changed the investigative path right from the beginning. Investigators were effectively blocked from conducting the standard, comprehensive, immediate interviews that are so crucial in a time-sensitive case, especially one involving a missing person, potentially a child abduction.
So every interaction then had to be filtered.
Pretty much. Yeah. Filtered through the defense team. It slowed down the process immensely. It prevented any kind of immediate scene reconstruction with the principals, John and Patsy, and it immediately raised strategic questions, fairly or unfairly, about their level of cooperation.
Because standard investigative protocol would require separating witnesses immediately, right? Conducting detailed, lengthy interviews while the memory is fresh, even if it's chaotic.
Absolutely. By the time investigators could formally interview John and Patsy, days or weeks had passed. The narrative had had time to coalesce, perhaps solidify. This initial barrier just complicated the process of collecting verifiable, granular evidence right from the very start.
The sheer swiftness of that legal intervention before the scene was fully secured, even before the child was actually found in the house, It's often viewed strategically, isn't it?
It is, and while it was fully within their rights, it immediately placed a wall, a barrier between the family and the police. It left investigators perpetually trying to play catch-up, working with fragmented testimony, and, as we mentioned, a compromised crime scene.
Okay, so we've established the emotional instability, the memory fragility, the procedural complications inherent in those early hours. But even the most sincerely held memory, the most practiced narrative, it buckles under the weight of one piece of undeniable physical evidence.
Yes.
Let's turn now to the hard science. The single most stubborn, persistent contradiction to the family's stated timeline. The discovery of partially digested pineapple in JonBenet's stomach.
This physiological fact, it really is the investigative linchpin, isn't it? The autopsy results confirm the presence of undigested, or at least partially digested, pineapple. Even Lou Smith, an investigator who famously leaned toward the intruder theory, still confirmed this fact directly to John Ramsey in a 1998 interview. His words were, "No question, there was pineapple."
No question. And the consumption of this fruit, it established a precise physiological event that absolutely has to be reconciled with the timeline. Specifically, the timeline of her supposed unconsciousness and lack of movement within the home. This wasn't just like a quick bite she grabbed earlier.
Exactly. That's the critical forensic point. Pathologists offered varying opinions on exact digestion rates. It depends on many factors, but they generally agree that consumption must have occurred anywhere from, say, 1 to maybe 3 hours, perhaps even a bit more, before death.
Which means
she was awake, she was mobile, and she was eating significantly after that 9:15 p.m. time when John claimed she was sound asleep.
this forensic detail just clashes directly and I'd say irreparably with John's firm insistence on that point. He was emphatic in his interviews. She was sound asleep, she didn't get up, and crucially, they didn't feed her when we got home.
And yet,
the physical body of the child offered irrefutable proof that this memory, or at least this stated account, was fundamentally inaccurate.
and the parents' reactions to this finding when confronted with it later were also quite telling, I think. When Patsy was asked about this in her 1998 interview, she expressed what seemed like genuine shock. She stated she did not know truly how the pineapple got in her system, and perhaps more significantly, she added that she very seriously doubts JonBenet would have fixed it herself.
Why does that detail matter, whether she fixed it herself or not?
Well, think about it. If she fixed it herself, it means she was independently awake, mobile, capable of moving around the kitchen or dining room, getting food. That alone contradicts the sound asleep narrative.
Right.
But if someone else fixed it for her or shared it with her, then that person was also awake and actively engaging with her in the kitchen or dining area. At a time the parents claimed the entire house was dark and silent, either way you slice it, the sound asleep narrative fails.
And the crime scene evidence itself seems to support the idea of maybe an interrupted late-night snack, moving this beyond just the autopsy finding.
Absolutely. Crime scene photographs, which are part of the record, document a large bowl on the dining room table. It's believed to have contained pineapple. There's also a big serving spoon with it.
Suggesting
a late-night snack occurred, possibly involving more than one person, given the large bowl and spoon, or at least a serving meant for more than just one small bite. It's a very ordinary domestic scene in itself, but in this context, it serves as this powerful, silent contradiction to the parents' claim of total stillness in the house.
And Patsy's reaction to that photo.
Patsy herself, when viewing the picture of the bowl in her 1998 interview, reportedly found it strange to me. Like it didn't fit her memory of how the house should have looked.
So we have this unyielding physical fact, the undigested food pitted directly against an emotional memory, or at least a stated account, of the sleeping child. How did John Ramsey, while still adhering firmly to the intruder theory, attempt to bridge this massive, undeniable contradiction?
Well, he had to engage in some pretty profound psychological and logical gymnastics, really, to reconcile the physical evidence with his intruder theory. In that same 1998 interview, faced with the undeniable fact that his daughter was clearly awake and eating after they got home, he theorized.
Let me guess, involving an intruder.
Well, involving someone she knew. He theorized that the only plausible way she could have consumed the pineapple after arriving home was if it were offered to her by someone she knew and trusted.
Okay, so not necessarily the killer intruder, but maybe someone else present.
Yeah.
This is where his imaginative reconstruction comes in, isn't it? He uses conjecture to try and maintain the core intruder narrative.
Exactly. John offered a specific theory, actually, centered around the family's Santa Claus performer from a party earlier, Bill McReynolds.
Santa Claus, seriously.
Yes. He speculated, purely speculated that if McReynolds had maybe secretly promised JonBenet a late-night visit or a special gift delivery after the party, she wouldn't have been alarmed by someone coming to her room or finding her awake. She would have, in John's words, hopped right out of bed for Santa.
Wow. Okay. Did he have any basis for this?
He admitted himself that this imaginative reconstruction came from tidbits heard through investigators rather than any personal knowledge or evidence. It really demonstrates how he was grasping at almost any external possibility, however unlikely, to explain away these internal facts that didn't fit his primary narrative.
What's so fascinating here is that the physical evidence, the pineapple, it forces the family, or at least John in this instance, to acknowledge the child was active in the middle of the night. But to maintain their overall position, they have to invent this elaborate, specific, and completely unverified narrative involving a known outsider, Santa Claus no less, to explain away that activity.
That's the core tension right there. The pineapple just stands as this silent witness, forcing everyone, investigators, the family, the public watching, to confront the friction between the parents' deeply held, perhaps sincere belief, and the unyielding certainty of physiological time. It simply proves she was awake, mobile, and eating at a time that directly contradicts the family's crucial defensive timeline.
And this singular detail, it compels a completely different potential accounting of those elusive hours, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It fundamentally shifts the necessary focus of the investigation, moving it away from just the time of a potential entry and towards the activity within the house after 9:15 p.m.
Which brings us inevitably to the complications surrounding Burke Ramsey, the 9-year-old surviving sibling. His presence, his perception during the crisis, that was also deeply scrutinized.
Deeply. The initial narrative provided by John and Patsy Ramsey was very clear on this point. Burke remained sound asleep in his room, totally isolated from the crisis unfolding downstairs throughout the entire period. That included the frantic 911 call and the initial police arrival.
And the purpose of stating that was?
Well, it protected him, obviously, from questioning and trauma, but it also simplified the narrative considerably, didn't it? It kept the focus squarely on the external threat, the unknown intruder.
But that narrative that he was asleep the whole time, that was challenged almost immediately by technology, by audio analysis.
That's right. Transcripts related to the later Burke Ramsey versus CBS lawsuits cite forensic audio experts. These experts suggested that a child's voice, potentially Burke's, could be distinctly heard on the enhanced 911 recording. Specifically, in the moments after Patsy thought she had hung up the phone but the line remained open.
And this audio discrepancy, if true, carries enormous weight, doesn't it?
Enormous. If those enhanced tapes were accurate, and there's debate about the clarity and interpretation, of course, but if they were, John Ramsey himself noted in an excerpt related to his book, he acknowledged it would mean that he and Patsy were inaccurate when we testified that we had not awakened Burke or talked with him until later in the morning.
Inaccurate. That sounds like more than just a simple mistake in recall. It suggests potential concealment of Burke's awareness, right?
Oh, that was certainly the implication drawn by some investigators. The weight of that potential discrepancy led investigators, according to the lawsuit documents, to redirect the entire focus of this investigation onto Burke, at least for a time.
Why? What was the thinking there?
The thinking was, if he was awake, or at least aware of the crisis unfolding, why was his presence and potential knowledge initially concealed by his parents? The suspicion, naturally, would be that his potential testimony, or maybe just his observations of the household that morning, might contradict the parents' established account of events.
And these questions, they fueled years of intense public speculation, didn't they? Often driven by interpretations of Burke's demeanor in the immediate aftermath.
Yes, and some of those interpretations were quite harsh. One particularly pointed observation cited in that CBS lawsuit material focused on an early psychological interview Burke underwent just 13 days after his sister's death. The analyst noted critically that Burke apparently never asked the detective conducting the interview if his sister had been found, what happened to her.
And this alleged lack of probing questions is apparent detachment from the situation. How was that interpreted?
Well, by some, it was interpreted as potential evidence of guilt or knowledge or even complicity, which is, it's a truly devastating psychological assessment to place upon a 9-year-old child who's just experienced unimaginable trauma, especially one who'd likely been deliberately shielded from the horrific details by his parents at that point.
The parents, though, they offered a strong counter-argument, a mitigating psychological perspective on his behavior.
They did. Patsy, in her 1998 interview, cited Burke's therapist. The therapist apparently explained that children handle things differently. It's not always how adults expect.
Right.
Patsy described Burke as trying to hold it together and be real strong for John and I. This suggests his apparent detachment might have been a protective coping mechanism, which is actually quite common in children who feel the immense pressure and grief of their surroundings, but don't know how to express it.
And child psychology often supports that view, doesn't it? Things like flat affect, detachment, even a lack of expressed curiosity can be ways for children to manage an unbearable reality.
Absolutely. Yet in the court of public opinion, and perhaps within certain investigative circles aiming for a quick theory, these psychological nuances were often lost. Lost in the rush to judgment, maybe?
We also know, from Burke's own reflections much later, that the experience itself was profoundly traumatic and confusing for him. He described those mandated interviews, didn't he, as the most boring thing I have ever done.
Yes, sort of deflecting the emotional weight. And that confusion, that trauma, was undoubtedly compounded by the relentless public and media scrutiny he faced from such a young age. Burke himself, reflecting years later in that Dr. Phil interview transcript, called the media presence around their lives a chaotic nightmare. He stated that the intense scrutiny instantly made him a very private person and highly skeptical of the media. So regardless of the actual truth of what happened that night, the investigation and the media focus undeniably shaped his identity and his response to that trauma.
Which leads us back, in a way, to the continuous investigative focus on the family itself. Some critics view this as tunnel vision, especially considering later efforts to explore alternative theories, like the unidentified DNA found at the scene.
Well, the persistent focus on the family isn't entirely arbitrary, though. It's grounded in investigative protocol and, frankly, grim statistical reality. Investigative data gathered over decades of child homicide cases consistently shows a stark pattern, which is that the perpetrator, when a child tragically loses their life in circumstances like these, inside their own home, is overwhelmingly likely to be someone within the immediate or extended family circle.
Our source material notes this difficult statistical reality. I think it even references the biblical story of Cain and Abel.
Yeah, just to reinforce the point that sibling involvement, while profoundly disturbing to contemplate, is historically and statistically possible. It has to be considered.
So it's crucial to understand this distinction then. Investigators are trained to follow the data, follow the statistics, and that data points them, by probability, towards the internal environment first.
Exactly. It requires investigators to confront those difficult internal possibilities, even if the truth leads to uncomfortable, tragic places. The constant public and sometimes family insistence on an external intruder that often provides a necessary psychological comfort, perhaps. A desire not to live in a world where a parent or a sibling could commit such an unthinkable act.
But the statistical reality.
The statistical reality dictates that investigators must operate based on the patterns they have established over countless cases. They have to start inside the circle and work outwards.
Okay, this has been a really extensive look at this collision between, well, sincerity and science, memory and evidence. Let's just quickly synthesize the three massive fault lines we've covered.
Okay.
First, the fundamental conflict between the stated time of JonBenet being sound asleep versus the clear evidence of sustained activity within the house afterwards.
Right. The timeline problem.
Second, the irrefutable hard metric provided by the pineapple consumption, pinning down that activity to a specific time frame.
The pineapple, the silent witness.
And third, the ambiguity surrounding Burke's presence and potential knowledge during the immediate crisis, highlighted by that contested 911 audio.
The Burke question, yeah.
Ultimately, the investigative community, despite exploring other leads, repeatedly finds itself drawn back to these internal inconsistencies. Why? Because they're tangible, they are physiological, or in the case of the 911 call, potentially audibly recorded.
Exactly. The trauma of the event itself seems to have fundamentally fractured the family's ability, or perhaps willingness, under legal guidance, to provide a single, cohesive, factually verifiable timeline. And this forces investigators, and indeed the public looking in, to choose.
Choose between what?
Choose between a potentially sincere but deeply inconsistent and contradicted memory and those unyielding physiological and physical facts. And we can't forget the uncertainty introduced by that rapid legal intervention further muddied the waters right from the start, making immediate verification almost impossible.
Yeah, that rapid intervention of legal counsel. It effectively prevented the collection of critical primary evidence in those first hours. It stopped the necessary comprehensive standard questioning that often occurs immediately. It turned what should have been purely a police investigation into something resembling a legal battle almost from day one.
It did, and it ensured that the Ramseys' narrative, however fractured or inconsistent it might have seemed later, became the primary timeline. The timeline against which all subsequent physical evidence had to be weighed and, if possible, reconciled.
That procedural challenge is just immense for investigators, isn't it? It forces them to rely so heavily on forensics, on the physical evidence, to try and reverse engineer a sequence of events that ideally should have been provided, or at least clarified, by immediate, unfiltered testimony.
The physical evidence has to speak for itself when the key witnesses cannot, or perhaps will not, speak freely or consistently.
Which leaves us with this final provocative thought for you, the listener, to carry forward from this deep dive. Considering the sheer weight of the physical facts we've discussed, specifically that pineapple, proving activity after 9:15 p.m., and knowing that the rapid intervention of legal counsel fundamentally changed the investigative path right at the outset. If the opportunity somehow arose today, hypothetically, for John Ramsey to provide all evidence, completely unfiltered testimony, without any legal filters or solidified narratives, would he still maintain the exact timeline he held back in 1998? Or would the undeniable weight of the physiological certainty of the pineapple finally compel a different, perhaps more detailed accounting of those elusive, contradictory hours?
That's the question that hangs over it all, isn't it?